Imagine walking down a busy street. You pass dozens of faces. Some you glance at briefly, others you avoid entirely. Then suddenly, without conscious thought, you find yourself drawn to a particular stranger. Something about their features makes you pause, makes you listen when they ask for directions or recommend a nearby cafe. Within seconds, before they've even finished their first sentence, you've decided to trust them. Why? In a laboratory at Princeton University, neuroscientist Dr. Danielle Davies stares at brain scans flickering on her monitor. The images reveal something remarkable. Test subjects form trust judgments about faces in less than 1/10 of a second faster than a conscious thought can form. The brain doesn't wait for permission, she explains, pointing to activity lighting up the amygdala, our emotional processing center. Trust decisions happen before you know you're making them. This isn't just an academic curiosity. This split-second judgment affects who gets hired, who gets elected, who receives medical care, who gets loans, and even who goes to prison. A face deemed trustworthy might receive a lighter criminal sentence than a face deemed untrustworthy, even when the evidence presented is identical. The stakes could not be higher. But what exactly makes a face appear trustworthy? Is it symmetry, familiarity, cultural programming, or something more deeply encoded in our evolutionary past? The question becomes even more pressing in our digital age. We swipe right on dating apps, accept friend requests, and make financial decisions based on profile pictures. Artificial intelligence now generates hyper-realistic faces that never existed, designed specifically to trigger our trust responses. In a world increasingly mediated through screens, understanding why certain faces instantly earn our trust might be the difference between making sound judgments and being manipulated by design. As we'll discover, the science behind facial trust is neither simple nor straightforward. It spans multiple disciplines, from evolutionary psychology and anthropology to modern neuroscience and computer vision. What these fields reveal challenges our most basic assumptions about how we navigate the social world. And it all begins with a question that has puzzled scientists for decades. How did we evolve to make such rapid trust judgments, and why do so many of us make the same judgments about the same faces? 50,000 years ago, on the plains of early human civilization, a stranger approaches your small band of hunter-gatherers. You have mere seconds to decide, friend or foe, potential ally or deadly threat. This decision would have life or death consequences, not just for you but for your entire group. Evolution doesn't optimize for accuracy in all circumstances, explains Dr. Zachary Norwood, evolutionary psychologist at Stanford University. It optimizes for the kinds of errors that are least costly to survival and reproduction. Dr. Norwood's research suggests that our ancestors evolved to make rapid assessments based on minimal facial information because the cost of mistaking a friend for an enemy, a false negative, was relatively low, while the cost of mistaking an enemy for a friend, a false positive, could be fatal. This asymmetry of consequences shaped a visual processing system that makes instantaneous trust judgments. We're talking about systems that evolved long before language, Norwood continues. Before we could ask questions or engage in complex social negotiations, we needed visual heuristics shortcuts that would help us quickly sort potential threats from potential allies. These ancient visual systems persist in modern humans, operating largely beneath conscious awareness. When research participants are shown faces for just 100 milliseconds, too brief for conscious processing, they make the same trust judgments they would if given unlimited viewing time. Our instant reactions to faces aren't reasoned calculations. They're evolutionary reflexes. But what specific facial features trigger these trust judgments? The answer begins with something called the baby face effect. Pioneering research by Dr. Leslie Zebrowitz in the 1990s demonstrated that faces with certain infantile characteristics, large eyes, high eyebrows, small chins, and round cheeks, consistently rated higher in perceived trustworthiness across diverse cultures. These features trigger what ethologists call kinshentema, an innate caretaking response that evolved to ensure adults protect vulnerable infants. There's a kind of evolutionary hijacking occurring, explains Dr. Diane Dumont, developmental psychologist. Features that signal, "I'm harmless and need protection," in infants get translated in adult faces as, "I'm harmless and won't hurt you." This explains why successful politicians often have slightly more neotenous, childlike, features than average. Not so pronounced that they appear weak, but enough to trigger unconscious associations with harmlessness. Another key factor in facial trust is facial expressiveness, particularly in the eye and mouth regions. Faces that subtly mimic expressions of happiness, a slight upturn at the corners of the mouth or gentle crinkling around the eyes, tend to be judged as more trustworthy. We're not actually seeing neutral faces as neutral, explains Dr. Davies. What looks like a resting face to us is actually being unconsciously interpreted as displaying microexpressions. Even a photographed face that isn't actually moving is being read by our brains as if it were communicating emotional information. This phenomenon has profound implications. In one landmark study, researchers created computer-generated faces that varied only in subtle structural ways that mimicked happy or angry expressions. Participants rated the happy structure faces as significantly more trustworthy, even though none of the faces were actually smiling or frowning. This connection between facial structure and perceived emotion helps explain why some public figures can appear untrustworthy despite their best efforts. Certain facial structures naturally resemble anger or contempt expressions even in their neutral state, a phenomenon that can create persistent trust barriers regardless of a person's actual behavior. But evolution doesn't explain everything. As humans spread across different geographies and developed diverse cultures, new layers of complexity emerged in how we process and interpret faces. In downtown Tokyo, American executive Michael Reynolds struggles to read the reactions of his Japanese business partners. Their polite smiles and nods give him little information about whether they trust his proposals. Meanwhile, his animated expressions and direct eye contact, signals of trustworthiness in Western business contexts, make his Japanese counterparts slightly uncomfortable. This scenario illustrates how trust signals vary dramatically across cultures. While certain basic judgments about faces appear universal, extreme anger expressions universally reduce trust. For instance, the specific features that trigger trust or distrust show remarkable cultural variation. We've documented significant differences in how facial trust is assessed across cultural boundaries, explains Dr. Yuki Morimoto, cross-cultural psychologist at Kyoto University. East Asian cultures tend to focus more on the eyes when judging trustworthiness, while Western cultures give more weight to the mouth region. This finding helps explain why Western emoticons emphasize the mouth, smiley face, while Japanese emoticons emphasize the eyes, smiley face. These aren't arbitrary differences but reflect genuine variations in how different cultures process facial information. Research by anthropologist Dr. Daria Dyson reveals another cultural dimension. Societies with higher pathogen prevalence, historical exposure to disease, show stronger bias toward trusting people who look similar to their own ethnic group. This pathogen avoidance mechanism appears to create an unconscious association between different and potentially carrying unfamiliar diseases. It's not about conscious prejudice, Dyson clarifies. These are deeply embedded perceptual biases that evolved during periods when contact with unfamiliar groups genuinely did present disease risks. Unfortunately, these ancient adaptations don't serve us well in our interconnected modern world. Cultural differences in trust perception extend beyond ethnicity. Societies also differ in how they interpret signals of dominance versus submission. In highly hierarchical cultures, facial features associated with dominance, strong jawlines, prominent brows, may enhance trust in leadership contexts but reduce trust in collaborative contexts. By contrast, more egalitarian societies show less positive response to dominant facial features across all contexts. Even within a single culture, trust perception shifts dramatically over time. Historian Dr. Malcolm Haynes documents how American presidential candidates with beards were once perceived as more trustworthy, signaling maturity and wisdom, while in modern elections, clean-shaven candidates generally receive higher trust ratings. Facial hair is a fascinating case study in the cultural relativity of trust cues. Haynes notes, in the 1870s, a clean-shaven man might be viewed with suspicion. What was he hiding? Today, in most professional contexts, beards might trigger mild distrust in conservative settings. These cultural variations create enormous challenges for people who regularly cross cultural boundaries. International diplomats, business travelers, and immigrants must navigate complex, often contradictory trust cues. A facial expression that signals openness and honesty in one culture might read as suspicious or inappropriate in another. Yet despite these cultural differences, neuroscience reveals something remarkable. The brain regions that process facial trust are remarkably consistent across populations. The amygdala, fusiform face area, and medial prefrontal cortex activate in similar patterns across cultures when making trust judgments. It's the inputs and interpretations that vary, not the neural machinery itself. This raises an intriguing question. If our brains process faces using similar neural pathways regardless of culture, what exactly is happening in the brain during these split-second trust decisions? In a darkened laboratory at the University of California, Berkeley, research participant Elena Vasquez lies inside an fMRI machine. On a screen above her, faces flash for fractions of a second. Some appear trustworthy, others untrustworthy. Though Vasquez isn't asked to make any judgments. She's simply instructed to look at each face. Meanwhile, the powerful magnetic scanner captures her brain activity in real time, revealing an astonishing neural choreography. When faces with trustworthy features appear, her amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, shows reduced activity. When untrustworthy faces appear, her amygdala lights up, signaling potential threat. But that's only the beginning of the story. The real revelation comes from the timing. This amygdala response occurs approximately 33 milliseconds after the face appears, before conscious recognition is possible. Her brain has decided to trust or distrust before she's even aware she's seen a face. What we're observing is essentially a neural shortcut, explains Dr. Zachary Norwood, who collaborates on these brain imaging studies. The visual information takes an express route from the retina through the superior colliculus and pulvinar nucleus directly to the amygdala. This pathway allows emotional processing to begin before the visual cortex has fully processed what you're seeing. This low road for visual information explains why trust judgments occur so rapidly, but it doesn't explain how the brain determines which faces deserve trust. For that, we need to understand the sophisticated pattern recognition happening in specialized brain regions. The fusiform face area, FFA, located in the temporal lobe, specializes in face processing. This region activates strongly when humans view faces, much more than when viewing other objects. Research using direct electrode recordings from the FFA shows that this region can distinguish between trustworthy and untrustworthy faces within 170 milliseconds, still faster than conscious thought. The FFA isn't just recognizing that you're seeing a face, explains neuroscientist Dr. Danielle Davies. It's processing specific configurations of facial features and comparing them to internal templates. These templates include not just identity information but social information, including trustworthiness. But the most fascinating brain region in trust processing might be the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, an area involved in social cognition and decision-making. The MPFC activates differently depending on whether a face looks trustworthy or untrustworthy. But unlike the amygdala's rapid response, the MPFC engagement reflects a more deliberate assessment. The MPFC is essentially asking, based on everything I know about faces, social situations, and past experiences, should I trust this person? Davies continues. It's integrating the fast amygdala response with higher-level social knowledge. This multi-level processing explains why trust judgments can both feel instantaneous and be influenced by conscious reasoning. We have immediate gut reactions to faces, but these reactions can be modified by context and conscious deliberation. For example, when research participants are told that a face belongs to someone who behaved unethically, their neural trust responses change, even to faces they previously judged as trustworthy. The amygdala and MPFC activity patterns shift to reflect the new information. The brain's trust detection system also shows fascinating specializations. Some neurons in the amygdala respond specifically to eye contact, while others monitor facial features associated with threat, such as lowered brows or thinned lips. These specialized neurons allow for extremely rapid threat detection. Perhaps most intriguing is how oxytocin, often called the trust hormone, influences these neural systems. When administered nasally, oxytocin reduces amygdala activity in response to faces, essentially lowering the threat response. This helps explain why people with naturally higher oxytocin levels tend to be more trusting of faces that others might find suspicious. What we're finding is that trust isn't just about the face you're seeing. It's about the brain that's doing the seeing, explains Dr. Davies. Individual differences in neurotransmitter levels, connectivity patterns, and even gene variants related to social cognition can all influence who appears trustworthy to whom. These neural insights raise profound questions about free will and decision-making. If our brains make trust judgments before conscious awareness, how much control do we really have over these important social decisions? And how might these unconscious processes be manipulated? In a small conference room at Stanford University, Dr. Zachary Norwood projects a series of computer-generated faces onto the wall. Each face differs from the next in subtle, precisely calculated ways. The distance between the eyes shifts by millimeters, the height of the forehead changes slightly, the width of the jawline varies incrementally. After analyzing thousands of trust ratings, we've identified what we call the trust equation, a mathematical model that predicts perceived trustworthiness based on facial structure, Norwood explains. It's not a single feature that matters, but rather the relationship between multiple features. The trust equation reveals several key patterns. First, facial symmetry consistently correlates with higher trust ratings. Perfectly symmetrical faces are rare in nature, and slight asymmetry is normal. However, faces with more pronounced asymmetry tend to receive lower trust ratings across cultures and contexts. Symmetry serves as a proxy for developmental stability, explains Dr. Davies. A highly symmetrical face suggests the person developed without major genetic or environmental disruptions. From an evolutionary perspective, this might signal better health and therefore reliability as a social partner. The second major factor is facial width-to-height ratio, FWHR. The width of the face relative to its height. Faces with lower FWHR, narrower, longer faces, typically receive higher trust ratings than faces with higher FWHR, wider, shorter faces. This effect appears particularly strong in male faces. Higher FWHR in men correlates with higher testosterone exposure during development, explains endocrinologist Dr. Martin Seibert. Rightly or wrongly, higher testosterone has become associated with aggression and dominance-seeking behavior, which can trigger caution in trust assessments. The third crucial element is what researchers call facial morphology, the specific shape and positioning of features. High, widely spaced eyebrows, larger eyes, and a more pronounced forehead, signaling a larger brain case, all contribute to increased trust perceptions. These features create what we call face space movement toward expressions of happiness and away from expressions of anger, explains Dr. Norwood. A neutral face with slightly upturned eyebrows and wider eyes subtly mimics expressions of positive emotion and interest. Facial coloration also plays a surprising role in trust perception. Faces with slightly higher color contrast, particularly around the eyes and lips, receive higher trust ratings. Women naturally have higher facial contrast than men, which may contribute to higher average trust ratings for female faces in many contexts. Healthy oxygenated blood flow creates visible color patterns in the face, explains Dr. Dumont. Our visual systems have evolved to detect these subtle color cues as signals of health and emotional state. But perhaps the most fascinating element of the trust equation is how these features interact with perceived age. Facial features that blend approachability, slightly neotenous or youthful characteristics, with competence maturity signals like defined cheekbones and a moderately strong jawline, create what researchers call the sweet spot of facial trust. Too many childlike features and a face may appear trustworthy but incompetent, explains Dr. Davies. Too many dominance features and a face may appear competent but potentially threatening. The most trusted faces blend these elements in ways that signal both warmth and capability. This explains why many successful politicians, business leaders, and media personalities often have what anthropologists call mixed dominance signals. Faces that include both approachability features and competence features in balanced proportion. The trust equation has been refined through machine learning algorithms that can now predict with up to 75% accuracy how trustworthy a novel face will be rated by human judges. These algorithms have revealed surprising subtleties, like the fact that slightly thicker eyelids reduce perceived trustworthiness while slightly fuller lips increase it. But the equation becomes even more complex when we factor in movement. Static faces tell only part of the story. Real faces blink, shift expressions, and change subtly during interaction. In a behavioral laboratory at UCLA, research participants watch video clips of faces while eye-tracking equipment monitors their gaze patterns. The findings reveal something remarkable. Trustworthiness assessments change dramatically when faces are in motion rather than static. Static face judgments give us baseline information, but facial dynamics can completely override initial impressions, explains Dr. Danielle Davies, who collaborates on this research. A face with untrustworthy structural features can be perceived as highly trustworthy if it displays the right dynamic patterns. These patterns include several key elements. First, appropriate expressiveness, faces that show emotional responsiveness matched to the social context. Faces that remain unnaturally still or that display expressions incongruent with conversation content trigger distrust. This explains why individuals with reduced facial mobility, due to cosmetic procedures or certain neurological conditions, often report that others seem inexplicably wary around them. Second, microexpression consistency, the brief, involuntary expressions that flash across faces for fractions of a second. When microexpressions contradict verbal statements, a momentary sneer during a friendly statement, for instance, trust plummets. This is one reason why practiced liars focus intensely on controlling these microexpressions. Most people can't consciously detect microexpressions without training, explains Dr. Zachary Norwood, but their brains register them unconsciously. This creates that uncanny feeling that something isn't quite right, even when you can't explain why. Third, gaze patterns, particularly eye contact behavior. Research using infrared eye tracking reveals that trusted individuals maintain what scientists call dynamic gaze patterns, making eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds before brief, natural breaks, rather than staring continuously or avoiding eye contact altogether. There's an optimal eye contact range that signals interest without dominance, explains sociologist Dr. Devin Donaldson. Too little eye contact reads as evasiveness, too much as aggression or social inappropriateness. Perhaps most fascinating is the role of facial mimicry, our tendency to subtly mirror the expressions of people we're interacting with. When someone unconsciously mirrors our expressions with a slight delay, typically 0.5 to 1 second, we perceive them as more empathetic and trustworthy. Facial mimicry activates mirror neurons in the observer's brain, explains neurologist Dr. Sarah Fontaine. These specialized neurons help us simulate others' emotional states. When someone mirrors your expressions, your brain essentially thinks, "This person understands how I feel." This mimicry effect is so powerful that it works even when we're not aware it's happening. In one remarkable study, participants who interacted with someone who had been secretly instructed to mirror their facial expressions rated that person as significantly more trustworthy than participants whose expressions weren't mirrored. The timing of expressions also matters enormously. Trust increases when facial expressions change gradually rather than abruptly. Sudden expression shifts register as potential deception or emotional instability, while smoothly transitioning expressions read as authentic emotional responses. We've actually quantified the ideal transition speed, notes Dr. Davies. Expressions that develop over 0.5 to 0.75 seconds appear most authentic, while expressions that appear instantaneously or take longer than 1 second to develop tend to reduce trust. These dynamic trust factors explain why video conferencing can sometimes undermine trust. Slight transmission delays disrupt the natural timing of facial mimicry, while compression algorithms often eliminate subtle microexpressions. The resulting interactions feel subtly off in ways participants struggle to articulate. Many people report feeling inexplicably distrustful during video calls, explains Dr. Norwood. Their brains are detecting temporal abnormalities in facial dynamics that register as potential deception, even though no deception is occurring. Understanding dynamic trust factors has profound implications for fields ranging from diplomatic negotiations to telehealth. Simple adjustments to camera positions, lighting, and even internet bandwidth can significantly impact trust formation in digital interactions. But what happens when these natural trust signals are deliberately manipulated? In an age of advanced digital technology, this question takes on new urgency. In a Silicon Valley design studio, digital artist Ryan Chun manipulates a 3D model of a face destined for an insurance company's website. With each adjustment, widening the eyes slightly, raising the eyebrows, softening the jawline, the face becomes incrementally more trustworthy according to the algorithms guiding his work. We're essentially reverse engineering human trust responses, Chun explains. These faces never existed and never will exist, but they're precisely calibrated to trigger maximum trust. Welcome to the frontier of artificial trust, where technology deliberately exploits our evolved facial biases. From AI-generated customer service avatars to political campaign imagery, we increasingly encounter faces specifically designed to bypass our critical faculties and trigger trust. The technology behind this manipulation has advanced with breathtaking speed. Early attempts at trust-inducing artificial faces were easily spotted by their unnatural appearance. Today's generative adversarial networks, GANs, create hyper-realistic faces indistinguishable from photographs of real people, with trust-enhancing features precisely calibrated. What makes this concerning is the asymmetry of information, explains digital ethicist Dr. Danielle Davies. The creators know exactly which psychological buttons they're pushing, while the viewers have no idea their trust responses are being deliberately manipulated. The implications extend far beyond advertising. Research demonstrates that replacing human faces in news articles with AI-generated faces rated as highly trustworthy significantly increases readers' belief in the accompanying information, regardless of its accuracy. In one disturbing experiment, participants were more likely to believe demonstrably false statistical claims when they were attributed to AI-generated faces with high trust features than when the same claims were attributed to real human faces or presented without any face. We're not cognitively equipped to defend against this kind of manipulation, explains Dr. Zachary Norwood. Our trust assessment systems evolved in environments where creating fake faces was impossible. There was no evolutionary pressure to develop skepticism about whether a face itself is real. The problem extends to video as well. Deepfake technology can now generate realistic video of faces displaying precisely the dynamic trust signals discussed earlier, appropriate expressiveness, consistent microexpressions, and ideal gaze patterns. These videos can make synthetic characters or impersonated individuals appear trustworthy even to trained observers. The technology has far outpaced our psychological defenses, warns Davies. We're entering an era where the most basic social signal humans use for trust assessment, the face, can be comprehensively counterfeited. This manipulation isn't limited to entirely fabricated faces. Political campaigns now routinely alter candidates' facial features in subtle ways to enhance trust perceptions. Common modifications include slightly enlarging eyes, smoothing skin texture while maintaining perceived age, and subtly adjusting facial proportions toward trustworthiness ideals. These modifications are typically too subtle for conscious detection, explains political consultant Marcus Webb. They don't transform the candidate into someone else. They just present an incrementally more trustable version of the same person. Even more concerning is the personalization of artificial trust. Advanced algorithms can now analyze an individual's social media activity to determine which specific facial features trigger the strongest trust response in that particular person. This allows for the creation of customized trustworthy faces tailored to individual psychological profiles. In testing, personalized trust faces increase compliance with requests by up to 40% compared to generic trustworthy faces, explains marketing researcher Dr. Eliza Montgomery. The system essentially learns what your particular trust triggers are and generates faces specifically designed to activate them. The frontier of this technology is the integration of real-time feedback. Experimental systems use eye tracking, pupil dilation, and micro-expression analysis to monitor how viewers respond to digital faces, allowing the faces to adapt in real time to maximize trust signals that work with specific individuals. Imagine video conferencing with someone whose face is being subtly, continuously modified to appear maximally trustworthy to you specifically, suggests Dr. Davies. That technology exists today in research settings and will likely reach consumer applications within 5 years. This technological manipulation raises profound ethical questions. Should there be disclosure requirements when faces have been optimized for trust? Should certain contexts like medical information or financial services prohibit the use of artificially enhanced trustworthy faces? How do we preserve authentic human connection in a world of increasingly sophisticated trust manipulation? These questions become even more urgent when we consider how facial trust biases affect crucial societal decisions. In a Florida courthouse, 2 defendants await sentencing for identical crimes with identical evidence and criminal histories. Yet research suggests their facial structures alone could influence their sentences by as much as 8 months. The difference determined not by their actions but by the subtle trust signals their faces naturally convey to the judge and jury. The justice implications of facial trust bias are profound and disturbing, explains legal researcher Dr. Zachary Norwood. We've documented that defendants with facially untrustworthy features receive significantly harsher sentences than those with trustworthy features, even controlling for all relevant legal factors. This bias extends throughout the justice system. Police officers are more likely to consider trustworthy-looking suspects credible. Prosecutors are more likely to offer favorable plea deals to defendants with trustworthy faces. Parole boards grant early release more often to inmates whose faces trigger trust responses. The effects extend far beyond criminal justice. Job applicants with trustworthy facial features are more likely to be hired and receive higher starting salaries. Patients with trustworthy faces receive more time and attention from medical providers. Loan applicants with trustworthy faces receive more favorable terms from both human loan officers and algorithmic lending systems. What makes these biases so pernicious is that they operate largely outside awareness, explains social psychologist Dr. Danielle Davies. People genuinely believe they're making objective assessments based on evidence, when in reality their judgments are being significantly influenced by unconscious responses to facial structure. These biases create particularly significant disadvantages for individuals with certain medical conditions that affect facial appearance. People with facial paralysis, Parkinson's disease, autism spectrum conditions that affect expression, and various genetic conditions report persistent disadvantages in situations requiring trust, from job interviews to healthcare interactions. I consistently have to work harder to earn trust than my colleagues, explains Marcus Rivera, an attorney with Mobius syndrome, a condition causing facial paralysis. I've learned to compensate verbally for what my face can't communicate, but the initial distrust barrier is always there. The bias creates similar challenges for individuals from cultural backgrounds with different facial expression norms. East Asian individuals in Western contexts, for instance, often display more restrained facial expressions, which can be misinterpreted as untrustworthiness by Western observers accustomed to more animated expressions. What's particularly concerning is how these biases get embedded in artificial intelligence systems, explains AI ethics researcher Dr. Diana Drake. Facial analysis algorithms trained on human trust judgments inherit and amplify human biases about which faces deserve trust. This algorithmic amplification creates feedback loops that can reinforce existing disadvantages. When AI systems trained on biased human judgments make recommendations about hiring, lending, or criminal risk assessment, they systematically disadvantage individuals with facial features that trigger human distrust. We're essentially codifying our biases into systems that present themselves as objective, warns Dr. Drake. And because these systems operate at scale, affecting millions of decisions, they can significantly magnify societal inequities. This realization has prompted calls for both individual and systemic reforms. At the individual level, organizations increasingly provide facial bias training to decision-makers like hiring managers, loan officers, and healthcare providers. These programs teach participants to recognize and counteract their unconscious facial biases. The training works by making the unconscious conscious, explains corporate trainer Michelle Lopez. Once people recognize these biases exist, they can implement deliberate processes to ensure they're evaluating people on relevant factors rather than facial trust triggers. At the systemic level, some organizations have implemented blind decision processes, where facial information is deliberately excluded from initial evaluations. Some orchestras, for instance, conduct auditions behind screens to prevent visual biases from influencing musical assessment. Similarly, some companies now use text-based initial interviews before meeting candidates face-to-face. The most promising approaches combine awareness with structural changes. For example, some courts have implemented structured sentencing guidelines specifically designed to counteract unconscious biases, including facial trust bias. These guidelines require judges to articulate specific, evidence-based reasons for sentencing decisions. We can't eliminate these biases entirely. They're deeply encoded in our neural architecture, explains Dr. Norwood. But we can create systems that acknowledge these biases exist and build in safeguards against their worst effects. The challenge of facial trust bias raises fundamental questions about fairness in human societies. Should people be advantaged or disadvantaged based on facial features they didn't choose and can't change? How do we balance our inevitably imperfect human judgment systems with our aspirations for justice? These questions become even more complex when we consider how medical and technological interventions are increasingly allowing people to modify their facial appearance. In a high-end New York medical office, plastic surgeon Dr. Robert Merrill consults with a client, not about removing wrinkles or enhancing attractiveness, but specifically about increasing how trustworthy her face appears to potential clients. About 30% of my practice now involves what I call trust optimization, Dr. Merrill explains. Executives, salespeople, politicians, they come in with facial analytics reports showing precisely which modifications would increase trust perception in their professional contexts. This represents a significant evolution in cosmetic procedures. While people have always modified their appearance to enhance social reception, Modern technology allows for precisely targeted adjustments aimed specifically at triggering trust responses. Common trust optimization procedures include subtle brow lifts to create more open expressions, minor eyelid adjustments to increase apparent eye size, and small chin refinements to create more balanced facial proportions. These modifications don't dramatically change appearance but shift key features toward configurations associated with higher trust ratings. The most effective interventions are the ones nobody notices, explains Dr. Merrill. We're not creating new faces. We're making subtle adjustments that speak directly to unconscious trust assessment systems. The ethical questions surrounding these procedures are complex. Critics argue they represent a troubling form of deception, artificially triggering trust responses that might not be warranted. Defenders counter that individuals shouldn't be disadvantaged by arbitrary facial features, particularly in professional contexts where trust affects opportunity. Is it deceptive to straighten crooked teeth? To wear makeup? To dress professionally? Asks bioethicist Dr. Danielle Davies. Humans have always modified their appearance to influence social perception. The difference now is the precision with which these modifications target specific psychological responses. The phenomenon extends beyond surgical interventions. Trust optimization now includes specialized makeup techniques, facial exercise regimens claimed to enhance trustworthy expressions, and even trust posture training to align facial positioning with trust-enhancing angles. Perhaps most intriguing is the emergence of technology-assisted trust enhancement. Several companies now offer trust coaching services using real-time facial analysis to help clients develop more trustworthy expression patterns, micro-expression control, and optimal eye contact behaviors. We're essentially teaching people to consciously control facial signals that are usually unconscious, explains trust coach Zane Newell. With enough practice, these behaviors become automatic, creating genuinely more trustworthy facial dynamics. The market for trust enhancement reflects the very real consequences of facial trust perception. Studies consistently show that individuals rated as more trustworthy based on facial features earn significantly higher incomes across diverse professions, from sales and management to medicine and education. We've documented an average 8% income premium for individuals with highly trustworthy facial features, controlling for all other factors, explains economist Dr. Walter Stevens. Over a career, that translates to hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional earnings. This economic reality creates strong incentives for trust enhancement, especially in competitive professional environments. It also raises concerns about creating new forms of inequality based on access to these techniques. If trustworthy appearance increasingly determines opportunity, and trustworthy appearance can be purchased, we risk creating yet another domain where economic privilege translates into social advantage, warns sociologist Dr. Diana Darlow. The phenomenon raises deeper questions about authenticity in human connection. If someone has deliberately optimized their facial structure and expressions to trigger trust, is the resulting trust genuinely earned or artificially manufactured? The line between authentic self-presentation and strategic manipulation has always been blurry, notes philosopher Dr. Elena Martinez. We all adjust our behavior to social contexts. The question is whether these new technologies cross a threshold from normal social adjustment into something more problematic. Some companies have begun implementing policies prohibiting employees from undergoing trust-specific facial modifications, arguing they constitute a form of manipulation in business negotiations. Others have embraced the technology, offering employees allowances for trust enhancement procedures as professional development expenses. As these practices become more common, they may paradoxically become less effective. If everyone optimizes facial trustworthiness, the relative advantage diminishes. This could potentially trigger an escalating trust arms race, where increasingly extreme modifications become necessary to stand out. We may be entering an era where natural facial variation is increasingly replaced by optimization toward a narrow range of trust-triggering features. suggests anthropologist Dr. Zachary Norwood. The long-term cultural and psychological implications of this convergence remain unclear. What remains clear, however, is that our understanding of facial trust continues to evolve, challenging us to reconsider assumptions about how we connect with and evaluate others. In a Portland, Oregon middle school, students gather for an unusual lesson. Science teacher Dina Douglas displays pairs of faces on the classroom screen, asking students to identify which they would trust more. After recording their initial reactions, she reveals that all the faces were generated by artificial intelligence specifically to test trust biases. "I'm teaching them to question their instinctive responses," Douglas explains. "Not to ignore them completely. These instincts exist for evolutionary reasons, but to recognize when they might be misleading in modern contexts." This classroom represents a growing movement toward what researchers call trust literacy, educating people about their unconscious facial biases and developing skills to make more nuanced trust assessments. "We can't override our neural circuitry completely," explains Dr. Zachary Norwood, "but we can develop a meta-awareness that allows us to say, I notice I instantly trust this person. Let me pause and consider whether that reaction is based on relevant information or just facial structure." This approach acknowledges that instant facial judgments will always influence our perceptions but encourages supplementing these rapid assessments with more deliberate consideration. Rather than seeing facial trust responses as either entirely reliable or completely irrelevant, trust literacy treats them as one data point among many. The goal isn't to teach people to distrust their instincts entirely, explains Dr. Danielle Davies. It's to help them understand the strengths and limitations of these rapid judgments, and to know when additional information should take precedence. As artificial faces become increasingly common in our digital landscape, this literacy becomes even more crucial. Several tech companies have begun developing artificial face detection tools that can identify AI-generated trustworthy faces, helping users recognize when they're encountering deliberately manipulated trust signals. "We're essentially building technological defenses against technological manipulation," explains software developer Marcus Chun. The tools analyze statistical patterns in faces that typically indicate artificial generation optimized for trust. Meanwhile, some social media platforms have begun requiring disclosure when profile images have been significantly modified to enhance perceived trustworthiness, similar to requirements for disclosing sponsored content. These technological and policy approaches reflect a broader recognition that facial trust biases must be managed rather than simply accepted or rejected. The goal is creating systems that acknowledge our evolved responses while preventing their exploitation. Perhaps most promising are approaches that leverage technology not to manipulate trust but to transcend appearance-based bias. Video conferencing platforms are developing expression normalization features that adjust for cultural and neurological differences in expressiveness, helping ensure people aren't disadvantaged by different baseline expression patterns. The system detects a person's individual expression baseline and subtly enhances emotional signals that might otherwise be missed by viewers from different cultural backgrounds, explains Dr. Diana Drake, who consults on this technology. It's not changing what the person is communicating. It's helping ensure their actual emotional expressions are accurately perceived. Similarly, workplace collaboration platforms increasingly incorporate multiple communication channels beyond facial cues, ensuring that individuals whose trustworthiness might not be optimally conveyed through facial appearance can establish trust through consistent behavior over time. True trust should ultimately be based on demonstrated reliability, not appearance, argues organizational psychologist Dr. Meera Patel. Our goal should be creating environments where initial impressions based on facial structure can be readily revised based on actual behavior. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about trust, moving from static judgments based on appearance to dynamic assessments based on interaction and behavior. While our instant facial assessments will always influence first impressions, truly meaningful trust emerges through consistent experience over time. The face is where trust begins, not where it ends, explains Dr. Norwood. Our evolved facial processing systems give us quick starting points for social navigation, but genuine trust is earned through repeated interactions that confirm or contradict these initial impressions. This perspective offers a more nuanced middle ground between uncritically accepting our instant facial judgments and attempting to override them entirely. It acknowledges their evolutionary origins and continuing influence while recognizing their limitations in modern contexts. As we navigate an increasingly complex social landscape where faces can be modified and even fabricated, this balanced approach may represent our best path forward, neither rejecting our evolved intuitions nor being governed by them. Perhaps the most profound insight from the science of facial trust is not about faces at all, but about the remarkable complexity of human social cognition. Our ability to instantly assess potential allies and threats based on minimal facial information reflects millions of years of evolutionary pressures and social learning, encoded in neural circuits that operate largely beyond conscious awareness. Understanding these systems doesn't diminish their importance but allows us to appreciate their proper role as starting points rather than conclusions in the complex social dance of human trust. The face that launches 1,000 transactions isn't simply the most symmetrical or the most attractive. It's the face that speaks to ancient neural systems designed to distinguish friend from foe. By understanding these systems more fully, we gain not just scientific knowledge but something more valuable: the ability to connect with others based not merely on appearance, but on the deeper foundations of genuine human trust. In a world increasingly mediated through screens and shaped by technology, perhaps our most human capacity lies in recognizing when to trust our instant judgments about faces and when to look beyond them to the more meaningful measures of trustworthiness: consistency, integrity, and the accumulated evidence of behavior over time.